Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here in London at this phenomenal conference of LDX3. I'm really excited to be here today. So, as part of my background, I've been an engineering leader of various sorts for the last 18 years. I've built, grown, and led all types of teams that have built phenomenal things from interactive experiences that won various awards to deeply tier zero critical business applications. And I'm really proud about the things that my teams have built over the years at different types of companies. But when I reflect back on my career, I think about how this transition from when I was a software engineer into an engineering leader almost didn't happen. You see, when I was an engineer, I knew that I wanted to have something more, I wanted to grow, but I really wasn't clear on what that was. I wasn't clear on what that meant. I was lacking a bit of vision, and even more dangerous, the leaders around me who should have been mentoring me on what's next, they lacked a bit of a vision around what I could do. So when I eventually would pivot into a leadership role, have this career, I told myself that I'd be dedicated to making sure that any engineers that worked for me had a clear sense of what their pathways could be, and if one of those pathways was going to be into leadership, that I'd be there to support them. So this morning, I want to take some time and talk about how are we identifying some of these early career potential managers or leaders, how are we creating some frameworks for supporting them, and then how are we also mentoring them in this overall career growth. And to dive in, let's talk about the first big mistake that organizations make in terms of thinking about this next generation. And that is assuming that your best engineer on the team is going to be your top candidate for a managerial role. And I understand you have a very senior engineer, very talented. They want more. They're looking for more scope. They're looking for more impact. Maybe they're looking also for more money. And it also feels right to consider them for these roles. They've been driving impact, they've been driving technical excellence, they've led complicated things, but it's often the wrong decision to think of them as the best candidate in making this transition into this leadership role. And why? Because it's a very different skill set. Being able to manage a code base is different from being able to manage people. Being able to have a depth of knowledge in this I-shaped person is very different from having this broad set of knowledge from engineering to people in terms of having a breadth of knowledge there. And having control over your own deliverables is very different from managing other people and having control over their deliverables as well. So I reflect on this quote by the famous American author and comedian to some degree, Mark Twain, and basically it summarizes into, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's the things that you have strong conviction of that you think you know that'll end up getting you in trouble. So, in the case of a lot of these senior engineers that you might be considering, do they have a full visibility in terms of the types of management things that they actually will need to do? Are they fully equipped to deal with the daily curveballs of challenges that get thrown at leaders and managers? And in general, like this having to manage this broad prioritization, people coming at you with different things. I need this, I need that. It's a lot. It's a very different role. And unfortunately, I've seen it go pretty poorly for many engineers. I've seen people want to make that transition. They get in that first year and a half, and they don't like it. They don't love it. It's a very different role. I've had engineers that voluntarily leave companies. I've had engineers get involuntarily exited because while they excelled at one role, they weren't that great in this new particular role. And then even worse too, a lot of the other engineers around them see them as a use case and be like, do I want to follow in that route? No, not me, because I don't see it going well for them. So I think it's something very important to consider in terms of evaluating talent. Now, maybe on your teams, you've made a decision that, hey, there isn't anyone internally. I should be focusing externally for looking for talent. Just by the raise of hands, I'm curious, how many people in the room are in a position to hire a person or have been at some point in their career, some sort of leadership role? Just raise your hand. Okay, a good amount, maybe 30, 40, 50%. Actually, keep your hands up. All right. If you've made a bad hire, keep your hand up, otherwise put your hand down. A bad hire, not mediocre, like bad. Okay, so that's like the vast majority of us have made that mistake. So in my case, my very first leadership hire was actually my hands down worst. Let's just say his name was Jeremy. We'll leave it at that. But it was a very bad mistake. Now, the challenge that I had was I didn't quite have the mental model and all the things that I needed as a first-time hiring manager to really be able to evaluate talent. How was I thinking about how this engineering leader would need to be complementary and additive to the team that they'd be leading? How was I thinking about the specific skill sets? And admittedly, I was getting a bit caught up into someone that was a strong talker that made me feel confident that I wasn't making a bad decision. But their ability to articulate and be able to build confidence in a room was disconnected from their ability to drive impact or to manage other people. So why do I bring up these examples of this story, particularly of my hiring mistake, as well as this transition when I was interested in moving into management, is because both of them were missing mentorship and guidance in the early points of different phases within my career. So I like to talk about what I call the systemic failure. Now, as product and engineering teams, we're often valued in the scalability and the resilience of the engineering systems that we build. We innovate, we migrate, we bring down technical debt, all with this goal of trying to make our teams move a bit faster and achieve whatever our company's business goals are. But the problem is, while we can build scalable engineering systems, we can often fail at building scalable people systems. Now, when I say people systems, I'm referring to this set of expectations that guide how people need to work with each other, the cultural norms that our organization, our companies might have, or even just our ways of communicating one-on-one or within groups. All those things are all important within people systems. And it's this combination of people systems and the engineering systems that ultimately will drive business success. It allows us to grow by replacing any ad hoc operations with more scalable, repeatable processes. We get to minimize the need to rely on individuals and their individual knowledge to drive things forward versus having it distributed to a group. And it lets us build a high-performance organization. And these human systems must seamlessly glide together with our business systems. Now, another story, one of my needs to implement a better people system is how I couldn't scale myself. So there was a point in my career where I was looking to prove to senior management that I could lead more broadly, leading more teams, leading more engineers, just to prove that I was worthy of sort of going up the engineering leadership ranks. And I was put in this position where I was going to be leading teams that had different cross-functional partners, supporting different business units. And unfortunately, it was actually going pretty poorly for me in that model. Being spread too thin, which I'm sure many of us can relate to in this room, and I was having fractional contributions to strategic conversations, but not being able to be fully involved. I was straining some of my cross-functional relationships by them wanting to have you way more engaged in their domain areas. And I realized that I needed to implement a model that wasn't implemented in my company at the time, but I thought would be important for just scaling in general. And that was having a tech leads model. Now, I know a lot of companies have had tech leads as a designated role, but in this particular case, it didn't really exist. And I would need to put something in place. So part of putting it in place was, how do I identify the candidates that will be great for it on the existing teams? How could I have a model that would allow multiple engineers to do it, one at a time, of course, and then they do it for a year, year and a half, just sort of cyclical effect so that more people can get that impact and exposure there. And then I knew that I would need to be able to lean into supporting them more, rather in my one-on-one meetings with them, how I'm providing more feedback with them, and even more critical, how am I providing air coverage, because they might be put in certain situations where they are still growing and learning, and just providing that support there. And at the end result, it worked out pretty great and was a very positive thing for both myself and scaling myself, but even more importantly, scaling the teams. And the thing that I'm most proud of with having implemented this particular people system of tech leads is that how many of the tech leads that served in that role ultimately feel like when they became managers that it was essential for them in terms of their maturation and their learning, getting this early exposure. Now, thinking about this idea of what organizations reward, we're going to kind of think of these in two different buckets. One is going to be these short-term behaviors, the other one's going to be these longer-term behaviors. Now, our short-term behaviors, short-term value, that's when we're sort of rewarding people that are able to lean into putting out fires, leaning into solving critical technical problems that might be going on, or just general one-on-one individual deliverable type of things. There's longer-term behaviors that we want to reinforce in people. This is when you have people that are able to invest more in coaching their peers. They're thinking about succession planning, and not just succession planning from a leadership standpoint, but even in engineers that own a particular part of a system, and also just this general reinforcement of cross-team alignment. Now, the unfortunate thing is many organizations will over-index on the shorter-term behaviors because that's what shows immediate value to companies and to teams and to getting projects out the doors. But we need to think about the longer-term behaviors we reinforce because it tends to add more support and scale as your company grows. And one thing that I continually reinforce to my leaders and my ICs is that the company you work in today is the simplest it'll ever be. Tomorrow's version of the company will be way more complex. Hopefully business is growing, business is expanding, and we need to think about how we are investing in the future of people as the business continues to evolve. Now, what we have here is a chart that basically shows this arc of company growth, right? As you go through different stages between startup, growth, scaling, and then enterprise, you have a company whose complexity continues to go at a certain rate here. And that complexity could be complexity in your processes, complexity in your dependencies amongst other teams, your communication styles. Now, the challenging thing is this complexity can often outpace leaders' ability to actually grow themselves. That's growing at a slightly more flatter rate, right? How are they being prepared for the next day? And what you end up is this gap, what I'll call a leadership depth, right? You have leaders that have been well-equipped for the company of today or yesterday, but are not fully equipped for where the company is going tomorrow. So this reinforces the idea how we need to continually to invest in our early career talent, whether they be software engineers or early career managers, to make sure that this leadership depth is kept to a minimal and kept small. So what is the development process? How are we've identified the people. What are the types of things that we need to do to make sure that we're continuing to grow in them? So I'm fully convinced that you can identify them early. New grads, interns, early career, the kind of behaviors that engineers on your team might exhibit to show that they have some management chops, not that they need to go from an intern to manager or whatnot, but you start to see some things they're doing. Are they taking ownership beyond what their roles and responsibilities are? Are they trying to make some influential decisions and guiding smaller projects without even being the project owner? And in general, they're supporting their teammates. Additionally, are they showing hunger? Hunger to grow themselves, hunger to learn new things, hunger to take risks, hunger to step out the box. I think these are all the things that you look for people in early career. Because at the end of the day, leadership shows up way before the formalized title of a manager or a tech lead or a similar role might be. Now, I will acknowledge someone transitioning from a software engineer to some sort of leadership role, it'll probably never feel like the right time, right? You may have identified someone, you see it in them about their potential, but they're like, nah, I don't know. Because the first year of this transition doesn't feel great. it can be difficult. And sometimes it might just plain suck. And I think it's why we as mentors need to make sure we're investing in them in this early transition time after you've identified someone and like how you're sort of guiding them through these early stages of their career. So, in my career of sort of trying to mentor people, there's a various amount of like quotes and scenarios that people come back to me with when they are a bit hesitant about the role. I'm interested, but not right now. Maybe they have some things going on in their personal lives. Maybe there's a project they want to see to get out the door in a couple quarters, right? Interested, but not right now. How about this one? I don't want my coding skills to diminish, right? Switching from someone coding 4 to 6 hours a day to someone spending 4 to 6 hours a day of meetings can be a challenging thing. And it's right to think that coding skills might diminish as you transition from there, or your ability to contribute to necessary architecture development. Or this was my personal biggest fear: will I end up in countless meetings all day? Because when I was a software engineer, I was in like an hour or two a day max, and then you end up in a lot more than that. And I didn't love meetings at the time, so that was a big fear that I had. And the final one: will this add stress to my life? And the answer is likely yes to all of these, because as a famous poet and rapper from Brooklyn, it is the more money, the more problems that come along. And then these are all things that we need to consider as part of this overall experience that people are going through and how to support that. Now, they're in the role, early career manager, and the reality is that new managers don't look great on the job, right? They may be slow to process situations. They may make imperfect decisions, missing out some key considerations or points, and they might be hesitant to speak up or, not contradict, but like go against other senior leaders that are in the rooms that they're also with. But I'd say this is all okay, because this is part of them building their own voice, their own personality to becoming a leader, and this is what you want to lead in and support, even if in this first year it doesn't feel so great for them or look so great on the outside. And it's also key that we need to be able to enable leadership responsibilities even before the title comes along. Can they run projects? Can we put them in ambiguous situations, but yet achievable for them? Because if they haven't struggled in a particular role before stepping into it formally, then it's way too late. And I'd also like to add that mentorship is not simply enough. We as the mentoring leaders need to think of ourselves as actual sponsors. Giving advice is not the same as representing them in rooms where they might need more support and coverage. You need to also be taking accountability into how you're supporting them and having more ownership of all of that. And actively looking to create opportunities for them as they're looking to grow. And maybe that growth is happening on a different team. Because mentorship without being fully invested is really just theater. And sometimes you need to just let them go, right? I've had scenarios where someone wanted to grow, but that growth didn't exist on the team they were on, right? Maybe they had to move to a sister team or a peer team, a sister organization. Maybe it's another type of company because they want to solve different types of technical problems than the ones that you have. And I think this is a healthy decision to make, because you want to make sure you're invested in careers, not just for how they can serve your company, but in the long term. Because a lot of these people come back again, or you cross paths again, and you want that positive energy to be there in terms of how you're investing in your overall career. So what's my call to action for you all? For when you go back to the office, when you go back home? And I think it's important to really take stock of the talent density of your teams, right? Where are the strengths of your teams? Where are the gaps that your teams might have? Maybe it's technical gaps. Maybe it's more on the soft skills, the gaps, like whatever's might there. You have to understand that. And then you also need to be thinking about what are the needs of your business? Again, not just for today, but your needs of your business for tomorrow. Do you have stability and a durable strategic direction of the company you're operating in? Is your company going through a lot of disruption and things are changing pretty fast? I think you have to understand these two dynamics so that you understand what you're navigating in and preparing your future leaders of tomorrow. Additionally, what is the appetite for risk, for trying new things and trying new model for operating? but we can do it. We can definitely do it. So I'd say, again, when you go back home, try to identify just one person, one potential leader on your team or one of your teams that you think will be ready for a next phase in their career. Also, identify a gap or an opportunity. Maybe it's something that you haven't been able to do because of your bandwidth that you say, let me try to see how this person can support and own that. And obviously, you want to continue to mentor and support them within this maturation, and then step back and continue to give them more autonomy. Thank you.